Okay, welcome back. We are continuing our reading of Chapter 2 of Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology. Chapter 2 is the imprints of experience, and this session will finish the 5th section in Chapter 2. And that section is titled The System of Sentiments of the Local Group. All right, when the boys have died their death to childhood and survived their painful metamorphosis into incarnations of the original androgynous being, they are told that they have no further operations to fear. There is one more extremely interesting event in store, however, when following a season of some 4 full months of continuous dancing and viewing of the world-establishing mythological age of the cosmic dream time, they will be shown in a very mysterious way a particularly important double Turinga, after which they will be roasted on a hot though smothered fire and finally sent back to the women's camp to be received by their waiting brides as fully tested and warranted Aranda males. The great festival of initiatory rites at the conclusion of which the double Turinga is exposed is known as the Angura ceremony, and the detailed account of its pantomimes in the work of Spencer and Gillen occupies more than 100 pages. The ceremonies are conducted by a number of tribal groups, which have come together with some 18 or 20 young men to be initiated, and the festal spirit, growing greater and greater from week to week, keeps the whole company, by some miracle of the gods, from collapsing in sheer fatigue. The daytime temperature at times reaches a broiling 156 degrees Fahrenheit. Nevertheless, the rites go on unabated, and if anyone dies of sunstroke, the blame is placed on the black magic of some alien tribe. A supernatural being, called Numbakula, eternal, is supposed to have fashioned the original Turingas, and then by splitting these to have made pairs. The pairs were then tied together, one having a man's spirit and one a woman's, the two being mates. And the name of these double Turingas is Ambilyurikira. The ceremonies, write Spencer and Gillen, now became very interesting. The leader of the Angura remained in camp preparing, with the aid of the men of his locality, a special sacred object which consisted of 2 large wooden Turinga, each 3 feet in length. They were bound together with human hair so as to be completely concealed from view. And then the upper 3 quarters were surrounded with rings of white down, put on with great care, and so closely side by side that when complete the appearance of the rings was quite lost. The top was ornamented with a tuft of owl feathers. When it was made, it was carefully hidden in the dry bed of a creek. The men's camp had been divided from the women's throughout the 4 months of the ceremony by this dry bed of a stream in which the Turinga now lay buried. There it remained until the candidates for initiation, who had been away from the camp all day on a number of assigned adventures, returned and were made to lie in a row on their backs, while an old man delegated to watch them walked back and forth along the line. Perfect silence now fell over the camp. Night had descended, the young men were lying still, their guard was slowly pacing, it was perfectly dark, and the leader of the festival, who had spent the day fashioning the double Turinga, was now squatting with the sacred object in his 2 hands, having dug it up from its place of hiding in the stream bed. He was holding it upright before his face by the undecorated end, holding it like a bat, and kneeling beside him at either elbow was an assistant. These 2 were supporting his arms, and the man was lifting and lowering the sacred object slowly before his face. When the boys, returning to camp, had been made to lie down, the solemn trio had been screened from view by a phalanx of old men. Throughout the night, therefore, lying on their backs in the silence, the boys were unaware of what was taking place. The old man with his two assistants, however, was continually lifting and lowering the sacred symbol, as Spencer and Gillen declare, without any cessation save for a few seconds at a time during the whole night. At a certain moment of the night the older men began chanting, but the boys remained as they were. The guardian still paced before them, and it was not until dawn, when the boys were roused, that the old leader and the two men supporting him ceased from lifting and lowering the Ambil Yerikira. There was little wonder, wrote Spencer and Gillen, that they looked tired and haggard, but even yet their work was not quite done. Getting up, they moved to the north end of the ceremonial area, the two sidesmen still retaining hold of the leader's arms. The young candidates proceeded to a line of sacred bushes, and having taken bows, arranged themselves so as to form a solid square behind the leaders. Most of the older men remained on the Angura ground, from which one of them, the watcher over the candidates, shouted instructions across to the women. The main party, headed by the three men bearing the Ambil Yirakira, and accompanied by a few of the older men, moved in the form of a solid square out from the Angura ground, over the river, and up the opposite bank to where the women stood grouped together. Each woman, with her arms bent at the elbow, moved her open hand, with the palm uppermost, up and down on the wrist, as if inviting the men to come on, while she called out, "Kuta, kuta, kuta," keeping all the while one leg stiff, while she bent the other and gently swayed her body. The party approached slowly and in perfect silence, and when within 5 yards of the front rank of the women, the men who carried the Ambil-Yirakira threw themselves headlong on the ground, hiding the sacred object from view. No sooner had they done this than the young initiates threw themselves on the top, so that only the heads of the three men could be seen projecting from the pile of bodies. Then, after remaining thus for 2 minutes, the young men got up and formed into a square facing away from the women, after which the three leaders rapidly jumped up, turned their backs on the women, and were hustled through a square, which they then led back to the Angura ground. And with this the Ambil-Yirakira ceremony came to an end. Thus were the boys, led by their trinity of mystagogues, introduced as marriageable men to the land of fair women, where the naked sirens who formerly had driven them away were now quaintly beckoning, cooing, "Kuta, kuta, kuta," and we may compare their role to that of the Solveig in the poet Ibsen's Peer Gynt, who softly sang her cradle song to the spiritual adventurer when he returned to her, following his long man's madness. "I will cradle thee, I will watch thee, sleep and dream thou, dear my boy." I think we shall not be going too far if we also compare the long night of silence with a deep sleep. When a deep sleep was allowed to fall upon the young men, and the wonderful double Turinga was lifted and lowered from nightfall until dawn, with the deep sleep that fell upon Adam when Eve was taken from his side. For after their rite of subincision, the youths, as we have seen, were comparable to Adam, as the primordial male-female, fashioned in the image of a god. But following that night, they were to be shown the woman. Traversing the river, they passed from the men's dancing ground, the magical land of myth, where the eyes see beings that are eternal, and the dream can be lived of "we two are one," to the shore of time, death, and procreation, where the two that are mystically one are to be recognized as practically two. The land, resented by all good Platonists, to which woman leads, as from the Garden of Eve. The land, resented by all good Platonists, to which woman leads, as from the Garden Eve. And the way of the young initiate now should be to recognize the wisdom of Kuta Kuta Kuta, as well as that of the bull roarer's thrilling hum, and to let even the sub-incised penis be a bridge to the toils of life in the world, as well as to the garden of the gods. These rites, then, on the one hand, are certainly particular to Australia, inasmuch as their references to the local animal ancestors, the bandicoot, kangaroo, etc., are not precisely duplicated anywhere else in the world. Nor shall we find elsewhere anything precisely duplicating the sacred Turingas, to which all Australian mythological themes are systematically referred. In different religions, different objects serve as sacra. Yet the idea of regarding as of divine origin a certain specific type of stick or stone, holy wafer, piece of bone, sacred utterance, or whatnot, is one of those universal traits of the religious life that Bastian termed elementary. Likewise, the motif of the male-female original being, which, as we have seen, has been developed in these Australian rites in considerable detail, from the moment of its first sounding in the ceremony of the two mothers and the two fire sticks, through the ordeals and related myths of the sub-incision, to the final night ritual of the supremely sacred double Turinga, and the return of the initiates to the woman's camp. The richly suggestive symbolism of this powerful motif is certainly duplicated in essence, and often even in detail, in many other traditions of the world. Furthermore, if we consider the underlying hermetic principle of the ritual series, we are again on common ground. For in any rite, or system of rites, of initiation, the same three stages are to be distinguished as in the rituals of Australia, namely, separation from the community, transformation, usually physical as well as psychological, and return to the community in the new role. The ritual of tossing in the air represented the crisis of separation. The rites of circumcision and subincision effected irreversibly the transformation, and the ritual of the double Turinga marked the return. In sum, then, it may be said that in the education of the young, it has been the general custom in traditionally based societies to reorganize the common human inheritance of infantile imprints in such a way as to conduct the energies of the psyche from the primary system of references of infantile dependency into the sphere of the chief concerns of the local groups, but that in this developed reorganization of the primary symbols, certain motifs appear that cannot be convincingly described as infantile, and yet are not exclusively local either. Throughout the world, the rituals of transformation from infancy to manhood are attended with and affected by excruciating ordeals. Scourgings, fastings, the knocking out of teeth, scarifications, finger sacrifices, the removal of a testicle, cicatrization, circumcision, subincision, bitings, and burnings are the general rule. These indeed make brutally actual a general infantile fantasy of Oedipal aggression. But there is an additional aspect of the situation to be considered, inasmuch as the natural body is transformed by the ordeals into an ever-present sign of a new spiritual state. For even in the gentler, higher societies, where the body is no longer naked and mutilated, new clothes and ornaments are assumed, following initiations, to symbolize and support the new spiritual state. In India, The caste marks, tonsure, clothes, etc. represent precisely the individual's social role. In the West, we know the military uniform, clerical collar, medical goatee, and judge's wig. But where people are naked, it is the body itself that must be changed. A Marquesan's physique, fully tattooed, was hardly a natural body anymore. It was a mythological epiphany, and the consciousness inhabiting it could hardly have wished to behave otherwise than in a manner comporting with the physical form. One is linked to one's adult role, that is to say, by being identified with a myth, participating actually, physically, oneself, in a manifestation of mythological forms, these being visibly supplied by the roles and patterns of the rite, and the rite in extension supporting the form of the society. So that in sum, we may say that whereas the energies of the psyche, in their primary context of infantile concerns, are directed to the crude ends of individual pleasure or power, in the rituals of initiation, they are reorganized and implicated in a system of social duty, with such effect that the individual thenceforth can be safely trusted as an organ of the group. Pleasure, power, and duty. These are the systems of reference of all experience on the natural level of the primitive societies. And when such societies are in form, the first two are subordinated to the last, which, in turn, is mythologically supported and ritually enforced. Ritual is mythology made alive, and its effect is to convert men into angels. For archaic man was not a man at all, in the modern individualistic sense of the term, but the incarnation of a socially determined archetype. And it was precisely in the rites of initiation that this apotheosis was effected, with what cruel imprint of hermetic art we have now seen. So that ends section 5 of chapter 2. Next time we'll begin section 6, titled The Impact of Old Age. Thank you very much for joining me. Hope you have a great day.